What you're hearing right now is the national anthem of a country with no airport, no roads, no farmland, and on most days, one permanent resident. Its entire territory is a rusting military platform, roughly the size of 2 tennis courts, standing in the North Sea, 7 miles off the coast of England. There is no beach where visitors can land. To enter the country, you arrive by boat, climb into what looks like a backyard swing, and allow somebody 60 feet above you to hoist you over the waves with a crane. Once you clear these customs, you can tour the National Chapel, the National Gym, the royal bedrooms, and the prison. They are all inside the same pair of hollow concrete towers, and several of them may technically be the same room. This is the Principality of Sealand, a self-declared nation founded by British war veteran Roy Bates. Roy claimed an abandoned World War II fort in the 1960s, declared himself prince, made his wife a princess for her birthday, issued a constitution, minted coins, printed stamps, fired warning shots at British vessels, survived an attempted coup, yes, I'm not kidding, launched a helicopter counterattack, imprisoned a foreign invader for treason, and prompted a West German diplomat to negotiate for the man's release. Everything I just said is real, and we'll talk about it. That sounds less like the history of a country and more like a campaign from a video game. But Sealand has now existed for nearly 60 years. It has a flag, a national motto, a royal family, an anthem, a currency, passports, noble tickets, an athletic team or teams, immigration rituals, and a government website willing to sell you the rank of Duke, which, we all know what I have to do, right? It has also been linked to pirate radio, a fake passport ring, an offshore internet haven, and a wildly ambitious real estate listing. The whole 9 yards, which coincidentally is about half the country's size. But when does pretending to be a country become functionally different from actually being another country? Roy Bates found a physical place the British government had abandoned and a legal gap it had not yet closed. His family then filled that gap with ceremonies, documents, armed resistance, and a staggering commitment to the bit. Other countries do not officially recognize Sealand. Britain almost certainly has the strongest legal claim over it today. And yet, the Bates family still controls the platform. The flag still flies, the anthem still plays, a customs officer still waits at the top of the crane. So today, we're traveling into the North Sea to explore how a wartime gun platform became the world's most famous micronation, and why the British government once worried it might become another Cuba. How a teenage prince helped win the world's smallest war, and whether Sealand is a real country, an elaborate family business, or the most successful piece of maritime performance art ever attempted, or a little bit of all of those things. So hello everybody, today we're talking about the history of the smallest and potentially angriest nation in the world, Sealand. I've always heard of Sealand, I didn't think much of it, mostly thought it was more of a joke, but after seeing all of this, if it is a joke, is the most elaborate and committed joke I think I've ever seen. And also, every detail about this is more absurd than the last, and I can't wait to tell you all about it. Speaking of supporting me, the No Trace Club merch drop has like another 4 or 5 days on it, so check that out in the link in the description at wendigoon.shop if you're interested. And those are ways that you can support me, but now I need to talk about someone else that's already supported me by having me show you all a thing that can support you if you want for free. Hey look, there's me and eyeliner. I'm in a hotel room because I just saw My Chemical Romance in Nashville. It was fantastic. You should have seen my eyeliner. But I know that when you're trying to budget for concerts or trips, it can be a headache, especially when you don't know where all of your money is going, and some of it's getting taken in subscriptions that you didn't even know you had. Well, thankfully today's sponsor, Rocket Money, is here to help. That's because Rocket Money is the all-in-one personal finance app that helps you cancel subscriptions, set saving goals, and manage your money better. And there's a few ways that Rocket Money does that. For one, it gives you a singular view of all of your finances. So all of your checking accounts, and savings goals are on one dashboard. You not only have a bird's eye view of all of your finances, but also up-to-date accounting on what your goals are. And Rocket Money keeps track of all of your subscriptions, and if you come across a subscription that you want to cancel or didn't know you were paying for, through the app you can cancel your subscription in just a few taps.
especially with streaming services now, I'll have apps that I got a free trial on to watch something one time that I didn't know I've been paying for like a year. So being able to see that and cancel at the same time is huge. In the app as well, you can create goals based on category, so you can see where you're spending money and set personal limits for yourself and how you spend in those areas, and monthly reports based on that spending. From there, Rocket Money can come up with saving goals and recommendations on what to do with your leftover cash, even having a savings goal in Rocket Money that you can move that cash into. And with all of it, Rocket Money will send you real-time alerts and notifications so that you can always stay up to date on where your money's going. Making money is hard enough, so keeping it shouldn't be just as complicated. And now Rocket Money's here to make that what should be less hard part lesser harder. And if you're looking to get in on Rocket Money, then now's the perfect time. That's because if you head to the link in the description at rocketmoney.com/Wendigang or scan the QR code, you can get started on Rocket Money for free. That's right, for free. From there, if you like what the app has to offer, you can sign up for premium to get even more features, but for now you can just try it out for yourself for free at, again, either the QR code or the link in the description at rocketmoney.com/Wendigang to get started saving your money today. Thank you to Rocket Money for sponsoring the channel. Their link will be in the description, and we are now back to the video.
We are going to go ahead and get into it, but as always, thank you for watching. Anyway, Sealand. Sealand sits on HM Fort Ruffs, also known as Ruffs Tower, near the shipping approaches to Harwich and Felixstowe on the eastern coast of England. From a distance, it looks like an oil platform that has been abandoned by both the oil company and God. Two enormous concrete cylinders rise out of the water, supporting a wide steel deck about 60 feet above the sea. On that deck are railings, antennae, small buildings, cranes, solar panels, wind turbines, and the red, white, and black flag of Sealand. There is no natural land. The ground, so to speak, is metal. The borders of the nation end where the deck ends, and then there is a long drop into freezing water. The platform's concrete base measures roughly 168 by 88 feet, and each of its two cylindrical legs divided into 7 floors that once held crew quarters, storage, generators, ammunition, and machinery. The upper deck originally carried radar equipment and anti-aircraft guns. Supplies arrived by ship and were lifted aboard with a crane. The same system that, more than 8 years later, remains the basic immigration infrastructure. When 60 Minutes visited Sealand, the reporter entered by sitting in a small sling and being winched upward from a moving boat. Inside, the crew found a bench press serving as the national gym, 2 candles functioning as the national chapel, and sleeping quarters so low in the towers that the sea slapped against the walls mere inches from the bed. The towers are cramped, damp, and industrial. Visitors descend through narrow passageways into a space described as part treehouse and part diesel-soaked submarine. At the bottom is a small jail, should anyone get out of line. Michael, the prince of the small nation, once described the sentence as bread, water, and 2 days in the brig. When asked what rights the Sealand Constitution offered a prisoner, he answered, quote, very limited. Which, what do you mean by that, Michael? What do you mean the Constitution's very limited for the, like, what, 1, maybe 2 guys you've ever had to put down there? Princess Penny Bates, Roy's daughter, remembered the early years as bitterly cold and without electricity. Flushing the toilet meant lowering a bucket roughly 80 feet into the North Sea, hauling the water back up, and pouring it into the tank. Fresh water, food, fuel, and repair materials all had to be brought by boat, meaning a bout of bad weather could delay a supply run for weeks. Prince Michael Bates recalled watching the horizon for the family boat, expecting it in 2 weeks, and sometimes waiting 6. This was the Sealand Royal Palace. Buckingham Palace has 775 rooms. Sealand had 2 concrete legs and an outhouse-level pumping system, and a view that mostly consisted of gray water. But the tower was never designed for comfort. It was designed for war. See, during World War II, Britain faced a serious problem in the Thames estuary. German aircraft could bomb London, attack the country's enormous dock system, and drop mines into one of the busiest shipping lanes in the world. The British needed weapons positioned farther out to sea, where enemy pilots did not expect them. So, civil engineer Guy Mansell designed a network of offshore forts that could be constructed in harbor, towed into position, and deliberately sunk onto sandbanks. Ruff's Tower was one of these Mansell forts. Its massive pontoon base was floated into the North Sea and then flooded, settling into about 37 feet of water. Once grounded, the two concrete towers remained visible above the surface with the steel gun deck on top. Instead of building an island, Britain built a fortified machine and planted it in the ocean. The Mansell forts carried searchlights, heavy anti-aircraft weapons, and Bofors cannons. Bofors cannons, more like Bofa cannons, meaning both of these cannons. They protected shipping from mine-laying aircraft, fired on bombers headed toward London, and later targeted V-1 flying bombs. Across the network, the Thames forts were credited with destroying more than 20 enemy aircraft and over 30 V-1s. Life aboard them, though, was punishing. More than 100 servicemen would be placed into the towers, dependent on the aforementioned supply boats for relief. The men slept and worked inside concrete cylinders surrounded by machinery, salty air, and the vibration of the sea. The installations remained under care and maintenance for years, but the last full-time military personnel left by the mid-50s. The weapons were removed and the machinery deteriorated. Salt water ate at the metal, birds nested on the deck, and the British government stopped treating the platform as a useful military site. That level of abandonment created the opening that Roy Bates needed, or as he would soon be, King Roy Bates. See, Britain had built Ruff's Tower, occupied it, and paid for it. But the fort itself sat just beyond the country's old territorial limit of about 3 nautical miles. As long as nobody cared about a decaying slab of steel and concrete in the North Sea, the legal distinction didn't matter very much. Then pirate radio arrived, and with it, Roy Bates. So let's talk about the guy who decided to turn this little dock into a kingdom. Patrick Roy Bates was born in 1921 and spent most of his life treating caution as a personal insult. At 15, he volunteered with the International Brigades to fight General Francisco Franco in the Spanish Civil War. During World War II, he served in North Africa, the Middle East, and Italy, rising to the rank of major. He was seriously wounded by a grenade and later escaped captivity after a plane crash. After the war, he moved through a string of businesses before operating fishing boats along the English coast. So as you can probably tell, Roy was a pretty tough guy. He was tall, resourceful, forceful, stubborn, and equipped with the public relations instincts of the kind of guy that answers the door with a shotgun. One visitor recalled that Roy's standard greeting was not exactly, quote, "Welcome to Sealand," but instead a demand to know what the visitor wanted, decorated with a word YouTube would prefer I don't say. Take your pick, whatever the worst one you can think of is, just imagine it's that. Roy called his crew the, quote, "hard bastards of the North Sea." His obituary would describe him as one of the ragtag group of entrepreneurs who saw offshore radio as a gold mine and bullied his way onto abandoned forts against rival broadcasters and the British government. Even the people who loved him seemed unsure where the sincerity ended and the joke began. That level of ambiguity would define Sealand. Roy was an absurdist with military training. He understood theater, but he was also willing to defend the theater with live ammunition. In 1949, he married Joan Collins, and together they had 2 children, Penelope, usually called Penny, and Michael. Joan had worked as a model and carnival queen, and like many first ladies, she was elegant, composed, and apparently willing to follow her husband onto a freezing anti-aircraft fort with no reliable electricity. Remember, fellas, if she ain't willing to do that, that's not love. Sure, she might tell you that she's sane and just wants the best for her family and please let the kids back in, but you don't need haters like that in your life. Roy's politics are also difficult to reduce to a clean label. He hated being told what to do and fervently resisted government control. He was attracted to business opportunities operating at the edge of the law. His son later portrayed Sealand as an expression of freedom, independence, and the right to live outside unwanted authority. But Roy did not begin with a plan to create a nation. He began with a plan to play music. Gosh, that sentence makes him sound So cool. In the early 1960s, the British Broadcasting Corporation dominated radio in the United Kingdom. Young listeners wanted the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, the Kinks, American rock and roll, energetic presenters, and music that they could hear during normal waking hours. The BBC offered relatively little of it. Entrepreneurs, or guys who knew how to broadcast from a radio, responded by anchoring ships outside British waters and turning abandoned sea forts into unauthorized radio stations. Gosh, it's so cool because Britain's so lame. They have so many stupid laws and they're so lame. Like a TV license, could you imagine? Could you imagine the concept of that? So guys just start throwing boats off the shore and playing the music they want to. It's like Footloose. But instead of a town, it's a whole nation. Or they have crooked teeth and talk about tea. At least all schools. Anyway, at its peak, this pirate radio attracted an estimated 22 million listeners in Britain. The stations used informal hosts, aggressive promotion, and non-stop popular music to serve an audience the official system had ignored. British authorities worried about the humiliating fact that millions of citizens preferred listening to people broadcasting from a rusty boat. The mere existence of pirate radio challenged the power and authority of the British government. Roy entered into the world of pirate radio in 1965. He and a group of men took over Knock John Fort, ejecting a rival crew and converting the platform into what they would call Radio Essex. Using old military equipment and an American radio beacon, the station became one of Britain's first full-time commercial pirate broadcasts. Roy was not the most polished voice in pirate radio. In fact, he was much more confrontational. In 1966, he was convicted under the Wireless Telegraphy Act and fined for operating Radio Essex. In response, Roy renamed Radio Essex, quote, Britain's Better Music Station, which was the broadcasting equivalent of putting on a fake mustache after being identified by the police. And just how I imagine that would work with the police, his operation was shut down soon afterward. The Marine Broadcasting Offenses Act of 1967 then targeted the people on land who supplied, advertised on, or worked offshore stations, and most of them closed as a result. Radio Caroline continued in defiance, while the BBC absorbed the format it had once tried to suppress. BBC Radio 1 launched in September of 1967, hired former pirate disc jockeys, and played the music young listeners had demanded. Sure, pirate radio may have lost the legal battle, but they won the culture war. Which, it's so stupid. I could talk for hours about stupid laws and ways people have acted stupid, but I feel like if I was in Britain, I would be so much worse. Like, could you imagine me right now dropped over there where it's like, oh, you want to listen to a little bit of the rock and roll? Jail. I would become a problem. There's a quote of me where I said something to the effect of, if I look up in the sky at night and see like an ad, I'm going to become a terrorist. If I grew up in Britain, that would have happened years ago. As a joke in Minecraft. Anyway, for Roy, however, he didn't care about the culture war. He had already moved on to a different battle. See, when Roy was using Knock John Fort for Radio Essex, he was close enough to shore that British courts considered it inside national jurisdiction. However, there was another nearby tower, Ruff's Tower in fact, that sat beyond the 3-mile boundary. According to the Bates family history, Roy traveled there on Christmas Eve of 1966 in a small maintenance boat, threw a grappling hook onto the structure, climbed the rope, and claimed the abandoned fort. See, other rival broadcasters had also been using Ruff's Tower. So in order for Roy to have his national takeover, it involved a lot of confrontations, warning shots, and in at least one account, Molotov cocktails. Roy stocked the fort with supplies, including corned beef, rice pudding, flour, and scotch. He intended to revive his radio station, but would never actually broadcast from Ruff's. Instead, when confronted with a new law designed to shut down offshore radio, he arrived at a much more ambitious solution. If Britain could regulate a British broadcaster, Roy would declare the station a foreign entity. On September 2nd of 1967, Roy Bates declared Ruff's Tower independent and renamed it to the Principality of Sealand. September 2nd was his wife Joan's birthday. He appointed himself as Prince Roy, named Joan his princess, and treated the country as a romantic gift. So you know what, ladies? I talked to the guys earlier. This one's for you. If your man has not found a fort at sea and declared war against the country of Britain just so he can get you your own country and name you princess as a birthday gift? What are you doing? I mean, he may say things like, I don't have that money, or we're being shot at, or I think this technically considers me a domestic terrorist. You don't need that kind of negativity. Girl. When Roy told Joan that she now had her own island, she reportedly observed that it could use palm trees, sunshine, and a flag. The first two things remained beyond the new government's budget, but Sealand eventually created the third, which uses diagonal fields of red, white, and black. The country adopted the motto Emery Libertas, meaning from the sea, freedom, and produced stamps, coins, a written constitution, and passports. The Sealand dollar was pegged to the United States dollar, although you would have difficulty persuading a vending machine to recognize it. Probably. I don't know. I mean, there's a good chance no one's ever tried, so maybe it works. The family described the fort as Terra Nullius, or Nobody's Land. Britain had abandoned it, and it stood outside British waters, so Roy argued that he could claim and govern it as he saw fit. Even though it was not technically land by Roy's estimate, this was now undiscovered land. He was basically Christopher Columbus, and these two piles of concrete were the New World. The legal challenge was that an abandoned British structure is not necessarily considered unclaimed territory, but there was enough legal uncertainty for Roy to force everyone else to decide whether removing him was worth the trouble. And trouble is precisely what Roy would cause to preserve his claim. Michael, Roy's son, was 14 when Sealand was founded, and Penny, his daughter, was 16. Michael had been at boarding school, but now his adolescence included maintaining weapons, hauling supplies, and helping his parents defend an offshore monarchy. You know, just like how I grew up. The family spent long stretches aboard the platform and commuted to an apartment in Southend by fishing boat. Later, they lived mainly on the mainland and left caretakers to hold the fort. Literally. Sealand's first few years could easily have ended as a short-lived stunt, but instead, the British government's actions helped Roy build the mythology. In late 1967, Britain demolished several other abandoned sea forts. The Bates family watched explosions throw massive pieces of steel through the air. As this was happening, helicopters and naval vessels came close to Ruff's Tower, and somebody aboard a government tug allegedly shouted that Sealand would be next. And the threat was believable. Declassified British files showed that officials discussed Sealand at high levels. The Foreign Office, Ministry of Defense, Home Office, Treasury solicitors, and Post Office all had reason to care. Britain worried that the platform could become a pirate broadcaster or a criminal base. There was also the possibility of it serving as a tax haven, creating intelligence problems, or worst of all, embarrassing the status quo as a symbol of anti-government sentiment. Some officials reportedly feared that a miniature Cuba was forming just off the English coast, which, in my opinion, is a huge misunderstanding of what Cuba was, because I get you can be upset at this guy, and I'm sure they were, but it is one dude, his wife, and 2 kids versus Fidel Castro and the nation of Cuba, and Che Guevara. He was there too, but then he left. So mostly Fidel. The government considered sending Royal Marines to seize the fort and using helicopters, commandos, and a demolition team. But an assault risked the family and turning an eccentric dispute into an international spectacle. So Prime Minister Harold Wilson declined to authorize it. A country with fewer residents than the average group chat had created a cabinet-level problem. Which I'm sure a few of us got group chats that could create a cabinet problem. Am I right? Thank you. In 1968, a British vessel entered the waters near Ruff's Tower. The exact descriptions vary, but the encounter ended with Michael Bates firing warning shots. British authorities charged him with the firearms offense and brought him before a court in Essex. While the court did not declare Michael a foreign prince, nor did it recognize Sealand as a country, the judge did dismiss the case because Ruff's Tower again stood more than 3 miles off the coast. So therefore, the alleged act had occurred outside of the court's jurisdiction. And that distinction was exactly the validation that Roy needed. The Bates family presented the dismissal as a de facto recognition. A British court had tried to prosecute a Sealand resident and admitted that British law did not reach the platform. So to Roy, this confirmed that Sealand existed beyond the UK. He now had a judicial decision that he could place beside his flag, coins, constitution, and royal titles. For the next decade, Sealand survived in the gap between legal precision and public mythology. Reports placed its peak population somewhere between 22 and 50 people. But life on the platform was not without its challenges. In Sealand's earlier days, a pair of guards expected a 2-day stay that became almost 3 weeks. Their supplies dwindled so bad that they reportedly began showing signs of scurvy. Remember, kids, nothing establishes confidence in a new government like losing a war against vitamin C, and therefore also the sun. It's vitamin D. Vitamin C is citrus. The more you know. Still, Roy had something valuable: a physically controlled platform outside the old British limit and a growing international reputation. Foreign investors began expressing interest in potential opportunities for the small nation, and it was one such relationship that would nearly cost the Bates their country. Which leads us into the world's smallest coup. In the 1970s, Roy befriended Alexander Achenbach, a German lawyer who was described as Sealand's prime minister. Achenbach and a group of German and Dutch associates had ambitious plans for the fort. Those plans included a casino, a hotel, a banking center, and luxury development. You know, all those things are a combination of businesses that are usually advertised by a man wearing a white suit on a yacht. But Roy and Achenbach disagreed over who controlled the project and how Sealand should be developed. And in August of 1978, as Roy and Joan traveled to Austria to discuss a business deal, a helicopter appeared on the horizon. It was Achenbach. Saying his name like that, like, it's Achenbach, make him sound like a Doofenshmirtz villain. Achenbach was arriving with a group of armed men and what looked like a film crew to execute the first and last coup d'etat in the nation's history. The official Sealand website, because yes, of course they have one, would refer to the men during this event as terrorists, which I guess technically. I mean, if we really want to get down to the nitty gritty, sure. I mean, you're the king, president, prime minister, whatever, you can call him whatever you want. Once the men landed, they overpowered Roy's son Michael, who was there on the Rick alone. According to the Bates family, the invaders locked Michael inside a steel room for several days. Then they put him on a fishing vessel, transported him to the Netherlands, and abandoned him without money or a passport. I mean, my gosh, maybe this Achenbach guy is like a Marvel villain. He waits for the dude to leave and invades his country and then throws the son on a boat going towards the Dutch. So with this battle being over, no losses on one side, one imprisonment on the Sealand royal family side, so therefore a decisive terrorist victory. Sealand has fallen. After I say Sealand has fallen, can you play a really dramatic, like, blah, like a music? Please, thank you. When Michael made his way back home to mainland England and shared what had happened, Roy assembled friends, weapons, and a helicopter of his own to take back his land. Also, I like the way that sentence is worded. It implies that Michael swam back to England. The official Sealand account says that the pilot was Captain John Crewdson, a stunt pilot who had worked on James Bond films. The counterattack would be called Operation Trident. Because, of course, you know, operations have code names for like secrecy among people that have them, but you're literally the whole country. There's no reason to call it that. His son had been kidnapped and sent to the Dutch, and then he gets a James Bond pilot to fly him back with a gun to take his country back, and he's like, I'm not doing it unless it has a nickname. If I can't call it Operation Trident, I'm not going. This guy's so cool. Roy's group removed the helicopter doors, armed themselves with sawed-off shotguns, flew low over the North Sea, and approached the platform at dawn. Michael later described jumping from the aircraft into the middle of this occupying force. A shotgun hit the deck and fired, and the invaders surrendered. It's important to remember that the country in this story is the size of 2 tennis courts. So when that shotgun went off, the whole country heard it. The entire war consisted of controlling one steel deck. Lose the deck, lose the nation. Win the deck, and everyone you defeated is still standing a few feet away. Roy released the Dutch participants, and in the family's retelling of events, the war had ended and the Geneva Conventions required prisoners to be repatriated. This is an extremely grand and boisterous way to describe letting several confused businessmen climb back into a boat and drive away. One captured German carried a Sealand passport. Roy declared that this made him a Sealand citizen who had betrayed his own country. The man was charged with treason, convicted by a Sealand court, in other words Roy, and held in the prison at the bottom of one of the towers. The coup transformed Sealand's invented institutions into something with immediate consequences. The royal family had now used force, regained territory, captured enemies, held a trial, and imprisoned one of them. If Sealand was theater, actors had begun using real guns and locking people in real cells. West Germany wanted its citizen released, and at first turned to Britain, who declined to intervene. It's so funny that at every step of this, Britain's like, I don't know, man, like they're all the way over there. So the German government sent a diplomat from its London embassy to negotiate directly with the Bates family. Now, here's where this gets complicated, right? What would you describe it as if a German diplomat from another country goes to make a prisoner exchange with you in your country? That sounds like a diplomatic mission to a place that, to the nation of Great Britain, is not a country. The German diplomat's visit would serve as the crown jewel of Sealand's sovereignty argument. To the Bates family, West Germany had treated Sealand as a state. A German representative traveled to the platform, spoke with its government, and negotiated the release of a prisoner held under Sealand law. Roy eventually released the man, reportedly after payment of a fine, and Sealand had entered relations with another country. This isn't a formal recognition, but it's not nothing. On one hand, governments negotiate with militias, hostage takers, pirates, criminal organizations, rebel groups, and unrecognized territories all the time. Talking to the person holding your citizen hostage does not necessarily mean accepting that person's kingdom. West Germany's apparent goal was to bring a German national home, not to open an embassy and exchange ambassadors. To which all Roy would really have to give would be his son, I guess, or Penny. He can give one of his two kids. But the visit mattered because statehood is not only a philosophical question, it's also a practical relationship. The Bates family controlled the platform, and Britain would not act. Germany needed something from Sealand and therefore dealt with it directly. For that moment, Roy's authority was real enough to shape another government's behavior. Sealand supporters connect the episode to the 1933 Montevideo Convention, which lists 4 classic qualifications for statehood. 1, a permanent population, which Sealand has. 2, a defined territory, which Sealand has. 3, a government, which, sure. And 4, the capacity to enter relations with other states, which, as this demonstrated, I guess they technically have. And of course, Sealand argues that it checks all 4 boxes. If you're feeling critical, you can probably challenge every item on that list. A rotating caretaker and a royal family living in England may not amount to the kind of permanent population that the convention envisioned. A British-built artificial platform may not qualify as a sovereign territory. A family administering its own property is not automatically a government. And negotiating one prisoner's release does not necessarily demonstrate normal diplomatic capacity. The convention says a state's political existence can be independent of recognition. In practice, however, recognition is what makes passports, courts, treaties, banking systems, and diplomatic protections function outside of the territory that claims they exist. Sealand can announce that its passport is valid, and an airport officer in France is free to announce that it is not valid at all. That difference between declaring authority and having outsiders honor it is where micronations live. If you asked if Sealand is actually a country, the safest answer is probably not, at least not in the conventional legal and diplomatic sense. No United Nations members formally recognize Sealand as an independent state. Its passports are not normal travel documents, its currency is not legal tender, as you could imagine, and a Sealand title does not place you in the British aristocracy. However, Sealand's strongest early argument weakened in 1987, when the UK expanded its territorial sea from 3 miles to 12. Ruff's Tower now sits inside Britain's claimed waters. So after this, Sealand declared its own 12-mile limit. But as you can imagine, no recognized government accepted it. I think that would technically include part of England at that point. If a serious crime occurred there today, British authorities would likely assert jurisdiction. as might other countries connected to the people or vessels involved. See, non-enforcement is not the same as independence. Britain may simply have concluded that storming a platform, arresting a royal family, and inheriting an enormous repair bill could create more problems than just allowing Sealand to sell mugs in peace. But I guess, in a sense, that's what independence is. Doesn't matter how independence is earned as long as it's adhered to. I mean, look at the United States. The founding fathers didn't want Britain around, so, we shot a bunch of them and they left. But even though we set up our own government and quit paying taxes and quit talking to them, they still wanted us to be under their jurisdiction, so by 1812 they came back around. Sure, Sealand is a small enough group that the idea of it's comedic, but if you were to just scale up the same idea they had to a nation like our own, same principles and ideas are there, even if less dramatic and much more contained. Not saying that to diminish, why people in the United States became the United States. It's not exactly comparable to a guy who wanted to play music on a old fort in the middle of the ocean. I'm just saying, from a legal perspective, you can kind of see some similarities. Maybe, potentially. At the same time, calling Sealand completely fake misses something important. The Bates family has maintained physical control for decades. People have lived there. Employees have repaired it. Invaders have tried to seize it. Courts and governments have had to decide how to respond. The country's symbols may lack international force, but the labor, money, danger, and family history invested in them are not imaginary. Sealand is not a recognized state. It is also more than somebody declaring a bedroom independent from their parents. It occupies the uncomfortable middle ground between property, community, business, protest, and nation. That ambiguity made it famous, but it also made the name extremely useful to criminals. See, Sealand began issuing passports as part of its effort to imitate the machinery of a state. The documents carried the country's name and symbols, and roughly 500 legitimate Sealand passports were reportedly issued. Then, thousands of counterfeit ones appeared. In the late 1990s, Spanish police and Interpol investigated a network operating through offices in Madrid. The group presented one location as a Sealand embassy, used fake diplomatic license plates, and handed out titles such as ambassador and minister. Police seized hundreds of blank passports. Investigators believe the operation had sold more than 4,000 fake Sealand passports to people in Hong Kong for around $1,000 each before the territory's 1997 handover to China. The papers were also linked to fraud and money laundering investigations involving Russian and Iraqi clients. There was no evidence that Roy participated, but Sealand had created documents that looked diplomatic without the verification systems recognized countries use, making the brand perfect for a passport that only needed to look official at a glance. Basically, there's this country off the coast of England that has done everything in its power to make official documentation. So if you're trying to do, illegal documentation or perhaps a little bit of smuggling, then that would be the place you get your fake passports. Because if they aren't doing any security checks and there's no one monitoring how they're made, then you could just steal all the designs and do your best, and someone will probably see it as a Sealand passport. The Bates family revoked every Sealand passport, including the ones it had issued itself. That decision protected Sealand from further association with the network, but it also quietly acknowledged the limits of its authority. A passport that can't be trusted by the country whose name's on the cover isn't saying much. The 1978 coup created another bizarre afterlife. Alexander Achenbach and his supporters established what they called a Sealand government in exile. For years, rival groups claimed to represent the same country despite neither having recognized sovereignty. So, to clarify what that means, after the whole Alexander Achenbach thing and there's a coup and then they fight him off and they drive away, Achenbach claimed that he had the legal right to Sealand because he was going to use it for all this business stuff. So, since Roy's playing his imaginary government game, Alexander's playing the imaginary government game and is saying that he is the proper government of Sealand, but he's in exile. So the real government is now in exile off the coast, while Roy is saying, no, I'm the real government, and you're the fake government of my real government. I mean, there's something so beautiful about a government in exile for a nation that the rest of the world does not believe is actually a nation. Sealand survived the scandal, thank God, but the family needed new ways to pay for maintenance. By the end of the 90s, a different group of outsiders saw potential in the platform, and these were not royalist or casino developers. Now, it was the worst the seas had to offer. Internet libertarians. Lucy, please play another. Thank you. See, around the year 2000, Sealand partnered with entrepreneurs who wanted to build an offshore data haven called Haven Co. The idea was perfectly designed for the early internet. Servers placed on Sealand would supposedly operate beyond conventional censorship and regulation. Clients could host controversial websites, financial services, gambling platforms, or private communications without worrying about government seizing the machines. To early cyberpunks and digital libertarian thinkers, the fort looked like a physical version of the internet itself. Decentralized, difficult to regulate, and inhabited by people deeply suspicious of authority. Investors spent millions installing servers, communication equipment, backup power, and cooling systems inside a World War II tower. There, of course, were limits. Sealand's operators did not want material involving child abuse, spam, or malicious hacking. They did entertain gambling and adult websites. Prince James later remembered one company asking to host a human organ transplant business. His summary of the national policy was concise. Quote, "Gambling and porn is okay, but we draw the line at harvesting human organs." Which, hey man, every country's got to draw the line somewhere, right? I love the but we draw the line as human organs. Like he's about to make like a tough guy statement or like a stand for the flag kind of thing. Like you can talk about me all you want, but if you talk about my friends, it's that same tone. It's like, look, we love gambling and porn, but if you try to take my liver. Haven Co. struggled with technical failures, financial disputes, unreliable connectivity, and the fundamental problem that Sealand was not beyond the reach of recognized law. I guarantee you put enough illegal stuff on those servers, some nation is going to come out there. The servers still connected through infrastructure controlled by companies and countries on the mainland. The people managing the business still live somewhere. Clients still needed banks. A platform can sit offshore, but money, cables, employees, and criminal investigations do not. So the partnership collapsed. The dream of a censorship-proof digital sanctuary ended in arguments over control and equipment. Today, old server racks remain inside Sealand as artifacts from a time when people believed the internet could escape geography. Haven Co. demonstrated the central weakness in almost every Sealand business plan. Customers wanted the benefits of sovereignty, but Sealand could not make outside governments respect those benefits. But all of that wouldn't really matter, because then the physical country itself nearly burned down. On June 23rd of 2006, an electrical fault caused a fire on Sealand's upper platform. Flames and smoke tore through the structure, damaging buildings and equipment. Caretaker had to be rescued, and the government, meaning the Bates family, faced the enormous cost of repairing a remote fortress exposed to salt water and storms. But luckily, like it had so many times before in its history, the intrepid little country prevailed. Sealand was able to rebuild. Repairs were completed later that year, and the platform was modernized over time with solar panels, wind turbines, LED lighting, rainwater collection, and updated living spaces. One original wartime diesel generator remained available as a backup to the backup. Then, after all this time, and this will be hard to believe, in 2007, Sealand was placed on the market. Because British law did not treat the platform as an independent country that could simply be sold, the listing was framed as a transfer of ownership or custodianship. Reports disagreed wildly on the price. One listing reached approximately 750 million euros, while other estimates suggested the family would consider offers in the 8 figures. Either way, that is a bold asking price for a piece of property where every delivery requires a crane and the nearest school is the ocean. Get it? 'Cause fish, swimming, okay. The file sharing website Pirate Bay expressed interest, imagining another attempt at a data refuge. But no sale would occur. Roy and Joan had retired to Spain before illness, brought them back to Britain. And Roy passed away in 2012, and Joan died shortly thereafter in 2016. At this point, they were spending a lot more time on land than they were at Sealand, and as their age was catching up with them, that's why they decided to sell. Their son Michael inherited the role of sovereign prince. Roy had spent decades refusing to surrender. Michael inherited not only the title, but the responsibility to preserve a structure that constantly rusts, leaks, and consumes a lot of money. The family's relationship to Sealand changed with each generation. For Roy, it began as defiance. And for Michael, who grew up there, it became identity and inheritance. For Michael's sons, James and Liam, it is also a brand that must survive online. And that is how the world's smallest country became an e-commerce business. Sealand's modern economy is built less on offshore banking than on people who enjoy the idea of Sealand. The official store sells flags, coins, stamps, clothing, identity cards, and noble titles. A digital Lord or Lady of Sealand title begins around €30. Baron or Baroness costs more, mind you. A knighthood reaches roughly $130, while the highest individual rank, a duke or duchess, begins near $600. Paperwork can be signed by Prince Michael and delivered in packaging elaborate enough to make the buyer feel that a constitutional crisis may be included. Are you telling me that right now I just got to pony up $130 and I will become a knight of a country off the coast of Britain that is built on an old anti-aircraft base? That's all? Now, obviously, these titles have no recognized legal force outside of Sealand. Not trying to have another established title fiasco on our hands. It is very clearly real to Sealand, but if Sealand's real or not is up to you. They do not give the buyer land, a vote in Parliament, or the right to demand that the restaurant staff begin to refer to you as Your Grace. There are souvenirs and donations wrapped in ceremony, and that appears to be exactly what customers want. The family will not publish a national budget or debt figure. Prince Michael once estimated an annual gross domestic product around $600,000, although journalists question how a country with no conventional statistical agency calculated that number. That's a stupid thing for a journalist to say, right? Because it's just him. If it was an actual country, then yeah, it'd be dumb for one guy to think he knows how much the country brings in. But he runs all the websites. So he's like, oh yeah, we made this much this year. And the journalists are like, oh, well, where's your statistical, blah, 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 at least our schools on. Anyway, what is clear is that online sales help pay for fuel, boats, repairs, equipment, caretakers, and the endless fight against corrosion. In 2024, Sealand introduced an e-citizenship program. For a monthly fee, supporters can receive digital services and identification while contributing to the project. The official website now describes Sealand as both a physical fortress and a global digital nation, claiming a community of more than 1 million followers across the world. Which there's kind of a message there about like not being literally recognized as significant as the individual, but then in the age of the internet, you're now far more significant in the realm of the digital than you were as the personal, kind of like how a lot of people in years past would have been looked over or never had their shot, but now they have the opportunity to because of the internet. And I'm rambling and it's really late, so I'll shut up. Michael's sons, James and Liam, handled much of the public-facing operation while also running a cockle harvesting business in England. Penny, the teenage princess, later operated a cosmetic clinic. And also there's this picture of Penny with 2 guns, and I'm a married man, so I'm not going to say anything, but to all of the unmarried females and fellas out there, this woman will fix you. Michael's wife, Princess Mei Shi, has been described as a former artillery major in China's People's Liberation Army. Sealand also lends its flag to sports teams and athletes in football, cricket, basketball, curling, sumo, and other competitions. There are not national teams recognized by the major international federations in the usual sense, but they extend the mythology. The nation exists wherever somebody chooses to carry the flag. That may sound cynical, but selling the story has kept the physical fort alive. Sealand is a brand. Yet the brand pays for real steel, real solar panels, real food, and the wages of the person who keeps the place from falling into the sea. Mike Barrington is Sealand's best argument that the country exists beyond a website. Barrington has worked on the platform since the 1980s and has served as engineer, mechanic, electrician, customs officer, immigration official, and head of Homeland Security. The Bates family lives primarily on the English mainland, but Barrington stays aboard for long stretches, sometimes alternating shifts with another caretaker. His job is less royal than practical. Saltwater attacks everything. The metal rusts, concrete cracks, and the pumps fail. Batteries need maintenance. Boats must be unloaded. Wind turbines, solar panels, generators, plumbing, radios, and cranes all require attention. If Barrington's bored, there is always something to hammer, scrape, paint, clean, or repair. In his little free time, he's brewed beer, read technical journals, and played darts. This sounds peaceful until you remember he's doing it alone inside a former anti-aircraft fort while container ships pass in the darkness. Braver man than I. Barrington also performs customs for visitors. He checks documents, stamps Sealand souvenirs, and welcomes people into the country. It should be noted that a visitor to Sealand should not place a Sealand stamp in an actual government-issued passport because some border officers may consider the document damaged or altered. Sealand's stamp is instead best kept in a souvenir passport, where the consequences remain, imaginary. When asked what his Homeland Security duties involved, Barrington said he was prepared to defend the platform from Britain or anybody else who tried to take it. This line sounds funny until you remember that Sealand has in fact been invaded before. His presence captures the contradiction at the heart of Sealand. A single caretaker is both the permanent population of a claimed state and an employee maintaining private property. He's an immigration department of one, but he is also the man changing the corroded electrical connection before the lights go out. Sealand says that now almost all of its electricity comes from wind and solar power, with old diesel generators held in reserve. Rainwater is collected and treated, and those improvements reduce the number of fuel and water deliveries, but they do not eliminate dependence on England. Food, medicine, spare parts, internet connection, and emergency services come from the country Sealand insists it's independent from. Which, I understand, literal dependence, sure they don't have as far as things go, but there's a ton of smaller nations that wouldn't exist without larger nations, right? I mean, sure, most countries probably have some means of making food and water, but medicine? I'm not saying that Sealand is a real nation or should suddenly get a seat at the UN or anything. I'm just saying if someone says oh, they still need stuff from the other country, yeah, you could say that about a lot of countries. Again, I'm not even necessarily arguing that it is one. I just think that's a dumb argument, and you should be better at it. There's no convincing public evidence that Ruff's Tower is about to collapse, but the structure was designed for wartime service, not permanent habitation across a century. The North Sea applies pressure every hour of every day. Storms shake the platform. Salt penetrates the cracks, and, it could always set on fire again. Emergency access depends on weather, boats, helicopters, and the working crane. It seems at this point the greatest enemy Sealand has is maintenance. But Sealand's not the only place to declare itself a country without receiving broad recognition. Micronations appear for many reasons. Some for protest, others for ideology or legal experimentation. Just the fact that you and your boys can sit around and make up a flag, and now you all have to salute it. In 1982, Key West responded to a United States Border Patrol checkpoint by declaring itself the Conch Republic. The mayor became prime minister, declared war on the United States by breaking stale Cuban bread over the head of a man dressed as a sailor, surrendered 1 minute later, and requested $1 billion in foreign aid. This whole thing was a performance that attracted attention to a real economic dispute and became part of the city's tourism identity. The Republic of Molossia in Nevada grew from a childhood project into a humorous micronation with customs, currency, ceremonies, and a president. And it's also the real quote-unquote president of that place that was the dictator or president in the nostalgia critics' Kick-Assia, which was set in Molossia. There's 3% of you who know what that is. Australia's Principality of Hutt River began as a protest against wheat quotas and operated for decades before dissolving. Declaring independence from another nation is easy. It's the recognition of that independence that's the hard part. Anyone can write a constitution. You can start your own micronation anytime you want. I mean, you could walk outside right now and build a checkpoint and make up money and say that you're the president now. What separates a recognized state is the network around it. Other governments honoring your passports, banks processing your currency, courts enforcing your decisions. You know, when other institutions see your borders as more than decoration. Sealand stands apart because it has physical territory people have fought over, a long period of occupation, and an actual court ruling about jurisdiction. Not to mention, a diplomatic negotiation after an armed coup. It's more substantial than a backyard republic, but it faces the same final obstacle. The world does not have to accept the story Sealand tells about itself. That has not stopped other people from borrowing the dream. There's a movement right now called seasteading. Seasteading is the modern effort to build permanent communities on the ocean, often with some degree of political autonomy. Instead of capturing abandoned forts, seasteaders imagine floating cities, modular platforms, or artificial islands where residents can test new forms of government. Supporters describe these settlements as laboratories for policy. Critics hear something else. Extremely wealthy people building private jurisdictions where they can avoid democratic accountability, which that's almost certainly what it will turn into. The Seasteading Institute, supported in its early years by PayPal co-founder Peter Thiel, okay, well, never mind. It's not what it's going to turn into, that's what it already is. Hey, are there going to be any flock cameras on the sea platform? Oh no? Just for us? That's funny. It's funny how that works. Anyway, the Seasteading Institute promotes floating societies as places to test new ideas. Its own material has described maritime registration as a, quote, glorious legal hack that can provide protection without full government control. Basically, they're all trying to steal Sealand's clout. But even then, Sealand demonstrates why the ocean does not erase law. Sealand's history is both inspiration and warning. Roy found a temporary loophole, occupied a neglected structure, and made removal politically inconvenient. He did not escape the international system. Instead, he found a small pocket where the system preferred to not deal with him. And like I said earlier, that's not nothing. Sealand began as a weapon. Britain planted Ruff's Tower in the North Sea to defend London from German aircraft. When the war ended, Roy Bates looked at the abandoned relic and saw first a radio station beyond government control, and then a country. He brought his family aboard and filled the fort with symbols of statehood. A flag rose where anti-aircraft guns once stood. Joan became a princess in a room that smelled like diesel. Michael went from boarding school to firing warning shots at British vessels. A court dismissed his case for lack of jurisdiction, and Roy turned that narrow ruling into the foundation of a national myth. The myth gained power because the family acted as though it were true, even when doing so became dangerous. They survived a coup, returned by helicopter, tried a prisoner for treason, and negotiated with a German diplomat. Later, they revoked their passports after criminals flooded the world with counterfeits, hosted an internet haven, rebuilt after a fire, and converted royal titles into maintenance money. And none of that caused the international community to recognize Sealand. Today, Ruff's Tower lies within Britain's 12-mile territorial claim. Its passports do not open borders. Its titles do not create legal nobility. Its constitution has force only as long as the people on the platform choose to follow it. For nearly 60 years, people have spent real portions of their livings keeping Sealand alive. Roy and Joan gave the project their identities, and Michael inherited it. James and Liam built a business around it. Mike Barrington repairs the machinery that allows the flag to keep flying. Millions participate in the joke without necessarily believing the legal claim. Maybe that's Sealand's real achievement. It never persuaded the world that it was a country, but it persuaded us to keep asking. Roy's experiment also highlights the limits of personal freedom. He escaped one set of rules, but never escaped weather, money, infrastructure, or other people. Sealand can declare independence from Britain, but it cannot declare independence from corrosion, or the ocean. It can print a passport, but it cannot force a border guard to accept it. It can crown a prince, but it cannot make the North Sea respect royal authority. But in spite of all those things, there it is. Sealand's motto is, quote, from the sea, freedom. The freedom it found was never complete, legal, or secure. But for Roy Bates, that may have been the point. Freedom was not something another government would recognize and hand over to him. It was something he could perform, defend, sell, repair, and insist upon for as long as the platform remained above water. The easiest way to describe Sealand is as a fake country. The more honest description may be that it's a real place built around an impossible idea, and a family stubborn enough to keep that idea alive. And yes, obviously, I will have the link to the Sealand website in the description, and you all can just max out your mom's card all you want. And that is the story of the smallest and angriest nation in the world. I think this story is fascinating. Again, I had heard of them before, and I had heard that they had got up to like some shenanigans, but I didn't know they were to this degree. I did not know there was a coup, and there had to be a diplomat sent, and all the other drama. But I don't know, to me, it's like, yes, it's not a country, and honestly, if they became a country, like if all of a sudden Britain was like, all right, you're in, you're one of us now, it would become so much worse for everyone involved, because then people could like try to immigrate, and then people would run for office and try to take it over, and then the people who immigrated would want to vote, and if you don't vote, it's a dictatorship, and that's the whole thing. Now Britain declares war on you, and you're in a rough spot. So I honestly think it's better for the country that it is not a country, but for whatever it is, I like it, and I'm glad it's there. Hopefully you all enjoyed it for well, and above all else, we just want to say thank you for watching. Like I said, I'll have the Sealand website linked below. You can check it out for yourself. I just really, at the end of all of it, I think it's all pretty cool. So hopefully you think it's cool as well and want to learn more about it for yourself. Like I said, the No Trace Club collection has got like, you know, a couple days, 2 or 3 days left on it. So get in on that while you can at wendigoon.shop. And then the control drink, the blueberry cobbler flavor, is available now. And if you want to get in on that, I think it's really good. I'm happy with the flavor, and it also supports the channel, and it means the world. And thank you. Everyone who made this video possible will be credited in the description, so be sure to show them some love. And all in all, I believe that should do it for now. But before I go, we just want to say thank you for watching. We hope that you enjoyed, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye! You know what would be a fun side gig for me is to become the Sealand equivalent of the Illuminati. Like I use an alias online and I like donate them money or whatever, and I start to make suggestions about policy and how they like curtail themselves, or like if they're an e-commerce site, like what they put on the t-shirts, real minor stuff at first, but then I start to like change like the equipment, and then I start to suggest like new solar panels they can get, but it's actually all stuff that I own. And then by the end of it, like they go to make a decision I don't like, and I just shut off the country, and they're like, oh no, what's happened? And I'm like, haha, it's me, the Illuminati, also known as Wendigoon. Give me the tower. That would go over well. That'd be cool. And then I get to shoot at British ships, which is really that's what I've been wanting.